Okay, so we'll continue our discussion about the founding era and about those foundational ideas about American democracy, about American freedom, and about how our system was supposed to be designed to deliver that freedom. All right? And so we start, when we think about, whenever we're talking about constitutional law, what we're asking is, well, what constitutes the government, and what constitutes the government's powers? What powers does it have? What powers does it not have? What is its role? What is it supposed to do? The way to think about a Bill of Rights and a Constitution is the Bill of Rights announces broad principles. We believe in freedom of speech. We believe in freedom of religion. The Constitution is more like an instruction manual. It's real nuts and bolts. All right, so there's going to be a legislative branch, and it's going to have a Congress, and Congress is going to have a House of Representatives and a Senate, and there are going to be 50 people in the Senate. Right? It's real nuts and bolts. All right? So when we're talking about constitutional law, what we're trying to do is decide a priori, in advance, what is the relationship going to be between individuals and I don't mean the state of North Carolina, I mean the state, just government in general, right? And this was new, because you got to think, coming out of a monarchical system, the answer is easy. The individual has zero power. The monarch has 100% power. Plenary power is the word. The monarch has plenary power, or a military dictator has plenary power, right? Or a queen, or any other type of situation like, or any type of system that you could name. A military junta, right? The government has plenary full power. They can take your life. They can kill you, right? The individual has no freedoms or powers. And so what the American Project is all about was rethinking this relationship and trying to give power, trying to give freedom, trying to give agency to individuals. And to do that required taking power away from the government. Right? And so it's trying to create a better balance. And so let's talk about two visualizations in how these very smart people structured the government, what they were up to in doing this. So their idea, as far as that relationship, goes something like this. And I call this the formula for American democracy. So we're trying to think about what's this relationship going to be, and there are three ideas. They come up with three ideas to answer the question, what this in social science means, what is the relationship between? What is the relationship between the state and the individual? And they came up with three answers, right? Limited government. This is a central animating principle of our system, right? And it is still part of our political discourse today. And you hear people in the news or on TV even using that phrase still today. We believe in limited government, right? In fact, that's a central plank, and always has been for decades, of the modern Republican Party. It's literally in their platform. We believe in limited government. Because the idea was, we don't want the federal government to act like a monarch. We don't want the federal government to have all the power, right? We want limited government. Let's take a look at this other visualization. Now I'm kind of riffing on that idea. So what they thought was, in coming up with a scheme, we had mentioned in the founding era timeline the idea that they intentionally made the federal government weak in the Articles of Confederation. So this is a conceptualization that they had. This was the idea behind the Articles of Confederation. They said, we're going to intentionally make the federal government weak. We're going to intentionally make the state governments very strong so that the state governments can act as a buffer between the individual and the terrifying power of the federal government. Remember, they were escaping a monarchy where the king could throw you in jail for no reason or have your head cut off for no reason, right? They're trying anything that reminds them of a monarchy like that is terrifying. I find it terrifying to this day. I find the federal government very terrifying, right? They could throw me in jail, they could sentence me to death, right? So the idea was this: we'll put a lot of power in the state governments, and they'll help act as a buffer to protect individuals, and the state governments will do a better job of protecting the freedoms of the individuals than the federal government will. That was the idea. And so what we can think of is this structure creates vertical checks and balances. So we have horizontal checks and balances. We have different branches of government, 3 co-equal branches: legislative, judiciary, executive. So those are horizontal checks and balances. These are vertical checks and balances. And when we force the federal government to share power with the state governments, that's called federalism. Federalism is a centrally important idea in our system, and that is we are forcing the federal government to give up some of its power. It's a power-sharing arrangement. There are going to be certain things that the federal government gets to be in charge of, and there are going to be certain things that the state governments are going to be in charge of. And then, of course, if you look at the 9th and 10th Amendments, you know that things that we do not put them in charge of, power over that remains with the individual. So that's the idea. Vertical checks and balances created by this structure, an intentionally weak federal government sharing power with the state government gives us the concept of federalism. And so to further answer that question, or put it in less visual, a less visual way and a more verbal way. So the idea of limited government. We talked about ways, right? So we want the federal government especially, but we also want the state governments too, because we want some powers to be left to the individual. And how we're going to do that, we got the state, and we're going to somehow calibrate that, and the individual is we're going to have enumerated powers. Which is to say, the federal government or the state government, or the individual for that matter, no one on this scheme can simply have full power. They're going to be enumerated, meaning numbered. We're going to make a list. And that's what they did. When you read the Constitution, Article 1 sets out, here are the powers that Congress has. And if it's not on the list, Congress doesn't have that power. Article 2, here are the powers that the executive branch has. If it's not on the list, they don't have the power. Here are the powers that the judiciary has. If it's not on the list, they don't have the power. And anything not on those lists falls by default to the individual. Because in our system, this was really the name of the game for the founding era. They were all trying to escape oppressive governments. Many were here because they were escaping religious persecution. So the idea of freedom of religion is really bedrock in terms of the founding era and the foundational ideas of our constitutional system. It's about not wanting to have a system where individuals are just treated like serfs or slaves, where the individual has human dignity and human autonomy. And we want to try to give the individual as much freedom as we possibly can. We can't have total freedom because then that would be chaos, right? We have to have some rules. So when we add limited government, only enumerated powers, reserving freedom for the individuals, the concept of ordered liberty. It sounds kind of like a paradox, but it's not really. We wouldn't want 100% liberty because that would be anarchy. So we want ordered liberty. So here are some ways to think about the American system.